My name is Amanda Lett, and I am the curator of collections and exhibitions here at the Rockwell Museum. I wanted to thank you all for joining us tonight for our first Art History Club event of the year, a deep dive into Paradise Park with Stephen Towns and Lou Vickers. A companion to Stephen Towns' Private Paradise, a figurative exploration of Black rest and recreation, which is an exhibit we have up for a few more days. So please come and see it if you haven't, which explores through paintings and quilts the real and imagined space of Paradise Park, a segregated park in Ocala, Florida. I am also really excited to introduce our new director, Erin M. Erin is the former director of the Palmer Art Museum and associate clinical professor in the College of Art and Architecture at Penn State. At the Palmer Museum, she provided transformative leadership, re-envisioning the museum's mission and goals, as well as strategic direction. She was at the forefront of the university's initiative to construct a new state-of-the-art building for the Palmer Museum located in the Arboretum at Penn State. The new 73,000 square foot museum, yes, I said 73,000 square feet, designed by Allied Works, opened its doors to the public on June 1st, 2024, and has achieved unprecedented attendance and was recently ranked by USA Today as one of the best new museums in the US. Co holds a bachelor's degree from the University of New Mexico, a master's degree from the University of Albany, State University of New York, and worked on a doctorate in the history of art and architecture at Boston University. She's held prior positions at the Hyde Collection in Glens Falls, New York, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and the University Art Museum, University of Albany. Everyone, please welcome Erin M.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Stephen and Lou. Amanda, thanks for the gracious introduction. And I'm just here to thank our special guests and welcome them, and to thank our members of the Rockwell Museum for joining us for this evening's webinar. Indeed, we're going to take a deep dive into Paradise Park with our special guests, Stephen Towns and Lou Vickers. This is our first public program of the year, as Amanda said. It is also my now second public appearance as your new executive director. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to meet you virtually, and I look forward to seeing you in person soon at one of our upcoming gallery talks or events. Until then, our virtual programs are an essential part of our goal to reach audiences and members near and far, and to bring special guests, including artists, curators, and scholars from outside the area. Tonight, Stephen Towns is zooming in from Baltimore, and our guest, Lou Vickers, is zooming in from Tallahassee, Florida. Welcome. The exhibition, Stephen Towns' Private Paradise, a figurative exploration of Black rest and recreation, holds a special place for me as your new director. This was the exhibition that was up when I was interviewed by the Rockwell Museum, and it deeply impressed me as a candidate. It is a powerful testament to the museum's visible commitment to equity, inclusion, and belonging, and its commitment to presenting the diversity and complexity of the Black experience in the United States. It centers the lived experience of Black Americans whose stories have largely been excluded from American history and in American art. The exhibition has had record attendance and received national media attention. It was named by Hyperallergic as one of the must-see exhibitions in upstate New York, and I can tell you that is no small feat. Right, Stephen?
Yeah.
Yeah. The exhibition also resonated with me on another level. I'm familiar with Stephen's work, having viewed the compelling exhibition Declaration and Resistance at the Westmoreland Museum of American Art, a museum outside of Pittsburgh, not far from my former museum home at Penn State. These two exhibitions, I've been thinking about it, Stephen, and I really see them as bookends, exploring this sort of dual aspect of the American dream. One through the lives and labors of Black Americans from past to present, and in the current exhibition at the Rockwell, the American dream through the lens of rest and recreation. Those unseen moments of freedom and leisure in a world otherwise rife with racism and segregation. Stephen Towns has dedicated himself to recovering these forgotten stories and representing them in brilliantly colored figurative paintings and quilts that expand the canon of American history. The Rockwell Museum has been at the forefront of collecting Stephen Towns' work. In 2023, we acquired a painting from the Declaration and Resistance series titled Hair Lessons from 2021, which is on view in the museum's Gallery of Contemporary Art on the 3rd floor of the museum. We have a print by Stevens, I Am the Glory, after a painting of the same title and subject. And tonight, I have some very exciting news to share. As museum members, you are the first to know that we are adding a third work by Stephen Towns to the collection. It is one of the quilted works titled A Taste of Lemonade, on view in the current exhibition. It is a seminal piece that was the genesis, I understand, Stephen, for the other large-scale quilts on view in the exhibition. Yay, right, good. Thank you, members.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, that's wonderful. With its engaging subject matter, gleaming coloration, and dazzling variety of quilted fabrics and flowing lines, it boldly speaks to themes of self-empowerment in spaces of freedom, bonding, and joy. Now, with this trio, if you will, of career-defining works in our collection, we have stellar examples of each medium for which Stephen Towns is best known. Our curator, Amanda Lett, oversaw the installation of the exhibition, working closely with Stephen in his studio of the exhibition Private Paradise. She also stewarded the acquisition of A Taste of Lemonade, and I want to thank Amanda for her many contributions to this project. On that note, I'm going to turn the monitor back to Amanda to introduce our special guests. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin, for that wonderful introduction, and to let everyone know that A Taste of Lemonade is staying in Corning. We are so thrilled for the work, and Erin, we are so thrilled that you are here and joining us tonight. So with that out of the way, I am so pleased to introduce tonight our speakers for the evening, artist Stephen Towns and Professor Lou Vickers. Stephen Towns is no stranger to our Rockwell audience, but please allow me to introduce him one more time. Born in Lincolnville, South Carolina, Stephen trained as a painter and received a BFA in studio art at the University of South Carolina. Currently residing in Baltimore, Stephen has expanded his painting practice to incorporate printmaking and quilting, creating a diverse body of work that reflects his commitment to shining a light on the Black experience in the United States. Since 2021, Stephen has been awarded Artist in Residence Fellowships at the Fallingwater Institute, the Ranolda House Museum, Alma Lewis Art Space, and was recently awarded the Mary Sawyers Baker Prize and the Mary Sawyers Imboden Prize by the City of Baltimore. His work is held in over a dozen collections, including our own, and most recently, he had a painting acquired by the National Portrait Gallery. Dr. Lou Vickers lives in Tallahassee, Florida. She was awarded a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship for Fiction, as well as for and also received 2 Florida Book Awards and 3 Florida Individual Artist Fellowships. In addition to writing Remembering Paradise Park, Tourism and Segregation at Silver Springs with Cynthia Graham, she's published Breathing Underwater, a novel, and 3 other Florida history books, Weeki Wachee, City of Mermaids, Cypress Gardens, America's Tropical Wonderland, and Weeki Wachee, 30 Years of Underwater Photography. So I hope you all will join me in welcoming Stephen Towns and Lou Vickers.
Hey, thank you for coming out, everybody that's here. I wish I could see people's faces. It's Zoom. We do what we can do. And I'm so happy to be here with Lou. I mean, it is not often that an artist gets to meet the people that inspire their work. And so I want to thank Lou for joining me today. It's your wonderful book and your collection of memories from Paradise Park that helped to make this exhibition and all this stuff come to fruition. So thank you for writing that book and taking the time to collect those stories, and for teaching people like me about this wonderful space. And so tonight we want to talk about like three different things based off of this exhibition, sort of the uh, aesthetics, the beauty of it, the beauty that I find in work, and the images and the history, the exclusion that the people felt, that actually were at Paradise Park, and sort of recollection and treasured memories that people have. So we're going to go through each of these things from my perspective, and from many of the things that Lou has learned. And so one of the things that Erin had mentioned beforehand is that I had done this exhibition called Declaration and Resistance. You can go to the next one. And a lot of that work was based off of Black labor in America. And oftentimes I use historical stories and historical images, like you'll see in the next slide, that help inspire the work. So this is one painting that was based off of an image of Black laborers in South Carolina. And if you look at this next image, it's based off of two laborers that had worked at Ranolda House, which was one of the museums that I had shown at. And after this, I wanted to do a little bit more focusing on sort of recreation and rest, and how Black people found solace in spaces. And I kept looking at Black beaches and Black parks and segregated parks. And then the thing that sort of kept shining to me was Paradise Park. And then I found this wonderful book by Lou, and my eyes sort of opened, and it inspired this work even more. So if you can go to the next slide. This is one of the works, one of the quilts that I made, called I Will Follow You, My Dear. And with this particular work, I'm always sort of thinking of beautiful, whether the stories are hard or they're not. I want people to see beauty in people's lives and their experiences. And here I had this underwater scene where people are basically escaping Jim Crow through diving and searching. And it's a place to sort of go under. And one of the big inspirations for that was photography. And Lou is going to tell us about some of the photography at Paradise Park and who did it. This is, well, me working on it. So, Lou.
Okay, yeah, and thank you, Stephen. That was very generous of you, because you're such an amazing artist, and I can't tell you how thrilled I am to be even remotely associated with you. I have to get a shout out to my friend Mary, who turned me on to your work years ago. So I've
Thank
been
you.
following you for a while. So yeah, so Stephen was, using or was bouncing off the photographs that were made by a photographer named Bruce Moser.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to give you guys a quick run through with Bruce's his work. Okay, so I met him when I went to Ocala to do some interviews with people that were associated with Silver Springs for a book on Weeki Wachee, which was an underwater mermaid park in Florida. And Bruce Moser kept coming up. And he was a photographer at Silver Springs. And so he knew the guy that founded Weeki Wachee, Newt Perry, who was also doing underwater stuff at Silver Springs. But Bruce came to Florida in 1934. And when he came, he was there to take photographs of a Tarzan movie that was being filmed. And there were no underwater cameras. He didn't have an underwater camera. So he went into the shop and made one so he could take pictures of Johnny Weissmuller, underwater. So that's how he started his career at Silver Springs in Ocala. It's one of the biggest attractions in Florida from the old days, like in the 1800s and stuff. People would go there for visits. And that's a photograph of Bruce in his studio holding a print of a photograph from Paradise Park. And whenever I went to Ocala, I would stop to see Bruce because he's a unique person. He's pretty famous in Florida because
Yeah.
he was famous for his kitschy underwater photos he made at Silver Springs. And when I was sitting in his office one day, I saw he had a series of photos in a rubber band. I mean, they were Paradise Park photos. And that's how I got interested in the project.
Wow.
So that's how I got started. So these are some photos of Bruce's underwater work at Silver Springs. That's him holding a crazy, probably homemade underwater camera. And that was one of his favorite models, who's Ginger Stanley. And Ginger Stanley was a double in the Creature from the Black Lagoon films. She was one of his favorite models. And this is a photo of Bruce. You know, he would always set up these kitschy photos for the press, you know, to put in the newspaper. And
And
this was
sometimes you
him.
see him on postcards too.
Yeah, he made them on postcards. You know, they back then newspapers liked to get this kind of material, and so they would publish them. And you know, so he created all these crazy underwater scenes. If there was a holiday, he would create a scene underwater to go with the holiday, and it would go into the newspaper. It would go on postcards, probably newsreels and things like that. So this is just him with a group of people, including the woman is Ginger Stanley. She was his favorite model there. And this was one of the images that he created, again, underwater, to advertise Silver Springs. So these are the photos, like I said, that would go out across the country in newspapers and magazines, you know, just all over the place. And there's Ginger. This is one of his, like I said, Ginger Stanley recently passed away, but she was one of his favorite models. But she worked in creature movies. She doubled for Esther Williams. She was very comfortable underwater, and that's something that those models had to be trained to be comfortable, so their faces aren't all messed up. Like my son tried to do it at McCulloch Springs down here, and he
Uh-huh.
was punching his face up, you know.
Yeah.
So Bruce loved to do these photos. So when Paradise Park opened, Bruce was the only professional photographer allowed to go over there. And I know he told me he actually had a black assistant at one point who was helping him in the darkroom. And then there was another African-American photographer whose work got lost to a fire that would go down there and make souvenir photos.
Mhm.
But Bruce also did postcards. All the photos from Paradise Park were pretty much all the what I would call commercial photos were made by Bruce. And this, so you can see the comparison, the two photos. The woman on the right is Larissa Lake, and I interviewed her. She was in her late 80s when I interviewed her, and she's also famous for being the first African American DJ in Ocala. She had all stories about that. So she loved being there. She loved being a star. And these were some of the underwater photos. Bruce had a hard time finding African Americans that would go underwater like that. And of course, it's no surprise why, because water was a contested area. You know, there weren't swimming pools available for everyone. They were segregated. There weren't beaches and lakes typically available for anyone. They were all segregated. And so he found Miss Lottie Donaldson, who was a PE teacher, and she was also the stylist for all the girls, you know, and they did the beauty contest. And the gentleman she's with was named Nathaniel Schoolboy Thomas, and he was a boat captain and a school teacher. You know, both were really, you know, powerful members in the community, and he got them to go underwater for the kind of photos he liked to make.
And can I say something real quick?
Yeah, sure, sure.
For
Jump
the
in.
people that haven't seen the show yet, Silver Springs and Paradise Park are in the same area. So in
Right,
Silver
yeah,
Springs, it was the white area. There were black men that were running the boats. They wanted a park that their families could go to, and that's how Paradise Park sort of came to be. It was the owners of Silver Spring not really wanting the black attendees at Silver Springs, and then they
right.
created Paradise Park.
Right. So yeah, and I'm going to go into more detail about that on the next round. But yeah, that's true. And even in Silver Springs was heavily advertised up all the way up north and everything. So whenever African American tourists did come south, a lot of times they would stop at Silver Springs. And at the time, you know, it was open, you could walk in, but if they tried to get on a boat, they would send one of the captains out or one of the grounds people to tell them to leave. And then once Paradise Park opened, they would tell them to go to Paradise Park. Now, white people weren't allowed at Paradise Park, and occasionally a white person would sneak in down there because they wanted to go to the dance pavilion. You know, they had a jukebox,
Yeah.
and they would be asked to leave. So, so again, this is another one of Bruce's photos. So even though Bruce was into his Florida photograph thing, he did the bathing beauties the same at Silver Springs as he did at Paradise Park. You know, he treated them exactly as subjects, exactly as the same, you know. So that's how it all got started, his aesthetic and the photographs that he was making.
It's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And as she mentioned before, we were going to talk about like how paradise came to be.
Right.
In this next image, I am focusing on the idea of black beaches. Like that was one of my main focuses when I made this work. But the other thing sort of that came to mind is like the separation between black LGBT and folks and people that aren't LGBT at this time period, people like Bayard Rustin, um, black gay people had to have their own special secret places, and that was the inspiration behind this piece, Looking for Lorraine. When you look at the image, you see this group of women. They're looking at Ebony magazines, and on Ebony magazine, you see a image of Lorraine Hansberry, who wrote A Raisin in the Sun, who was sort of a famous lesbian at that time period. And if you look at the couple on the right, there is a little book on the towel, and that book is actually the cover, the first cover of A Raisin in the Sun, that first edition. And so I wanted to look at like all of these various different aspects of separation that happened. And Lou's book has really helped me with learning how there were all of these parks and amusement parks that existed in the early 20th century that were all segregated. People had to find ways of finding amusement among themselves, but even in that aspect, they had to separate. The races were separated. And Lou's going to go some more into that with Paradise Park.
Okay, so I'll start with this clip here. This is a newspaper clipping from 1889 up in New Jersey. And you can see the title, Visitors Are Annoyed by Colored Servants on the Beach. And this is pre-Jim Crow. So Jim Crow developed out of these kind of situations. So these are natural spaces that are being, people are not being allowed to go to. They wanted to have rest and recreation. And that was one of the things I discovered when writing the book. As soon as slavery ended, African Americans wanted to travel. They wanted to go and
Yeah.
do things and enjoy themselves. And they were quickly met with, stuff like this, the African and his best girl, they got annoyed by them. And then
And
it
they
got,
were workers at that same resort. So they were
yeah,
workers trying to find peace after a shift. So like
right.
can't even imagine sort of going through that.
Yeah, they were working there, they were the waiters, the bartender, that kind of thing, the servant girls, and they would be out there after work just relaxing. And of course, the white people got annoyed, The white
Mm-hmm.
people did more than get annoyed. They killed people over it. And this was a clipping I found from 1919. And this was during the summer of what they called the Red Summer
Yeah.
riots. Yeah. And so this kid, I think his name was Eugene Williams. The water had been separated at this point on this particular lake, and he drifted over to the white section, and they threw rocks at him and killed him. They threw so many, they threw rocks until he drowned, and then a big riot broke out. And so these were the kind of things that were happening over natural places,
Mhm.
and that's kind of touching, to me, to imagine that. It's terrible. So with the thing with Silver Springs, Silver Springs obviously has been there forever, as long as the
Yeah.
world's been invented, right? I mean, it's a huge spring, and it was a big tourist spot back in the 1800s. And these boats would come up with Harriet Beecher Stowe came up on one of these boats to look at the
Mhm.
spring. And if you
Mhm.
look closely at the picture, you can see African Americans on this boat.
Workers. Yeah.
There was one particular steamship line that only hired black captains because they knew the river so well. And so they were hired to do these steamboats. And then you had people, you could see an African-American man here, and this is before Silver Springs was owned by the people that opened Paradise Park, because it was various people were out there running boat excursions and things like that. The guy that would end up running Paradise Park was an African-American man, and his father worked on this boat at Silver Springs, and he grew up at Silver Springs. So, so it was a thing. And there was actually a boat captain. I was reading an article about him from way back in the day. And they asked him, how did you come to Silver Springs? And he goes, well, my great grandmother was enslaved by the owner of Silver Springs. And
Oh, wow.
lived out there. Yeah. And so they always had a role at Silver Springs. And so when Ray and Davidson bought Silver Springs, they were the two men that bought it and turned it into what we know as modern Silver Springs. They only hired African-American boat captains, as you can see here, okay? Now, these boat captains would go on to agitate to get Paradise Park open. But first, what happened is a competing park opened down the river, and this was the land that would become Paradise Park. You can see on that brochure, under Paradise, it says the new landing, best boats, lower price, white boatmen. They advertised white boatmen because that's how racist everybody was.
Wow.
Because they were in contrast to Silver Springs that only hired black boatmen. Okay.
And
so,
I have a quick question.
yeah,
Was
go
this
ahead,
at the
Stephen.
same time that the Native American village existed,
Well, there was a Native American village down there.
it
Yeah.
was sort of a play village that
Well, it was. It was
Yeah.
weird, because Seminoles grew up, there were people, always Native Americans at that spring, but they did have this weird village where people were out there for, living actually, but it was like a living exhibit. It's kind of
Yeah.
and I have some photos from that too, but yeah, so there's always these weird race things going on in these places, but yeah, there were always Seminoles there too, but they had that weird exhibit. So this is another photograph of the black boat captains with the white patrons on here. This is another African-American boat captain. So what was going on is Ray and Davidson had, like I said, hired only black boat captains. And what happened once it became an attraction, then they were no longer able to go there. Okay, because now it's an attraction and it's segregated. So, like I said, they would ask the boat captain if someone showed up to go visit Silver Springs, they would tell them to go tell the African American person to leave. Okay, so they were agitating. They could occasionally go out, but they had to be really quiet to do that. But they wanted to take people out. So as you can see here, they're African American boat captains that were out there. This was the gentleman they hired to run it. He was African American boat captain at Silver Springs, but he was also very involved in the community in many different ways. So the good thing about it is Eddie Vereen, that's his name, was allowed to run Paradise Park, and he basically earned money off all the concessions and everything. Okay? So he brought in the jukebox, and they had picnics and all this stuff, which we'll go over a little bit, and some of that a little bit later too. So this is a picture of Eddie Vereen out at at Paradise Park once it opened. They could go down there and visit. This was the early brochure. As you can see, it says see Florida's Silver Springs from Paradise Park. And that's Eddie Vereen out there. And there's Larissa again. Larissa was a superstar. When I interviewed her, she thought she had, oh my God, you're interviewing me. And I'm like, I know, I think you're an icon to me.
Exactly.
So one thing I found interesting was when they wanted to open Paradise Park, where are you going to find lifeguards, right? All the water has been, you haven't learned how to swim.
So all the pools were segregated.
Yes, pools were segregated. I mean, Ocala finally did open some segregated pools, and some of these men were working at that segregated pool. But the men in these photos were really, outstanding members of the community. The tall guy there is a doctor, he's a dentist. A couple of the gentlemen were educators who worked in schools, and they were trained by Newt Perry, the guy that founded Wiki Watchy, and I was told
Mhm.
by them, Henry Jones was Eddie Verine's nephew, and he told me that Newt Perry would not take a picture with him, you know,
Oh,
because of the segregation stuff. But he
yeah.
taught them how to swim and how to become lifeguards, but would not take a picture with them. And this was a clipping I found in the newspaper because I got old school when I was researching.
Mhm.
If you want to do research, you have to get on microfilm, you know?
Yeah.
And so what I did is I just went back when I knew the place opened and scrolled through and found an ad. And I thought it was ironic, you know, because it's like now colored people can see Silver Springs, but the reality is Eddie Vereen grew up there. Like I said, one of the captains said his great grandmother was owned by a person at Silver Springs. So Black people have always been at Silver Springs. So I thought it was ironic, you know, that they had that in the newspaper. This was a little, I think it's like an ink pad thing, you know, a little flyer. And this was Eddie Vereen's, you know, grandson. And so Eddie Vereen's entire family worked at Paradise Park, but
And
they
if
agitated to get the park.
And if I'm correct, I'm not sure if I'm correct. I thought I remember reading that there would be these trucks with the boats on them that they would use to advertise the parks.
Well,
Like
what do
there were
you,
like all of these dynamic ways that they were using to advertise both Silver Springs
yeah,
Park and
well,
Paradise.
Silver Springs had the billboards all up and down, but Eddie Vereen, what he did is he had a vehicle, I think it was a truck, and he had the panels on the side, on the
Yeah.
back. There were signs, and he would drive up to, you know, Alabama, he would drive up, you know, mid country or whatever, advertising it. And people did come from all over the country to go there. Once he started advertising, there were 100,000 people a year coming there. And that was another issue, was the housing. Where are you going to put people? You know, the hotels, there were only like one Black hotel. So Eddie Vereen said, you know, he spent a lot of time trying to find places for people to stay when they visited Paradise Park.
And even just like finding places to stay with the Green Book on your way down if you're driving
Right.
from New York or Virginia or someplace. It can be both a dangerous sort of trek if you're going through sundown towns.
It was totally dangerous. And the thing was that everyone that, you know, would talk about traveling there, you know, they would tell stories about how the mom got up early that morning and cooked their meals and packed them. Because they
And
knew
stop
they were
at a
gonna have
restaurant.
to, they were no, yeah, they're gonna have to eat on the side of the road or at a picnic bench, and they're not gonna have a restaurant they can go to, and they're not gonna, sometimes they would sleep in their cars, and Eddie Vereen commented on that. He
No
commented on
restrooms too sometimes.
all of it, everything. So, yeah, so I don't think people realize how difficult it was to travel. In fact, the Green Book was one of them, and there was another one called the Travel Guide, and the caption on the bottom of the travel guide said, I think it said vacation and recreation without humiliation. And
Mm.
that travel guide had a little flyer in the back of it that asked people to report horrible things that happened so they could, you know, keep them all safe.
Modify,
Like if you
yeah.
went to a gas station and were treated poorly, let us know. And so this was a boat at at Paradise Park with African American patrons. And the thing is, the boats were the same. They were the same boats. They would just send them down the river to pick up people at Paradise Park. And then Paradise Park people could go up to Silver Springs, but they couldn't get out and couldn't do anything up there. They could just go up and look at the spring and then go back. So that's all they could do. And one of the women I interviewed was a child at you know, she was a child going to Paradise Park. And she told me, you know, she told me that she goes, Mama, don't they know we're swimming in the same water? You know, like how ridiculous to a kid. You know, a lot of the kids didn't know it was segregated because they were being protected by their families.
Yeah, and I actually met an older white woman who had gone to Silver Springs, and she had no I met two people that had gone to Silver Springs, and they had no idea that there was a black part, and they were both children at the time. But it's
Right.
interesting how people don't know about these things sort of when they're children. How
Well, even as
well it was hidden. Yeah.
well, even adults, Stephen, because I interviewed some white people that were associated with Silver Springs and they claimed to have no knowledge.
Wow.
No knowledge, okay? And so people just don't want to talk about those things. And the reality was, you know, that this place existed, and it was the only Florida attraction. I mean, Florida had a couple other African-American spots like Butler Beach,
American Beach.
American Beach, which were beaches, but this place had, basketball and, glass bottom boats and rattlesnakes and alligators, it had all the stuff you want to see.
Yeah.
In this last photo, I wanted to mention it because the boat captains would do these acts of resistance sometimes, and 3 boat captains told me the same story. And what it was about was the baptism. The African Americans would go to Paradise Park and have baptisms in the water. Okay, and it was open 7 days a week. So, if it was on a Sunday, they could still take a boat down there. So the captain basically was taking a boatload of white tourists down the river, and they saw a baptism in the distance. And one of
Wow.
the white tourists said, "I ain't never seen an N-word baptism before." And
Wow.
the black boat captain said, "And you ain't gonna see one today." And he turned the boat and went back. That's so funny.
Wow.
The 3 boat captains were telling me that story, So I'm not
Yeah.
true. So they had those little acts of resistance,
Yeah, yeah, and that sort of goes back to our last segment is like talking about treasured memories. Like even though all this stuff happened, like this story that you just told and how horrific it sounds to us, like these people remembered their time at that space and how beautiful it was for them to share a space with like-minded people that they could sort of feel safe from the outside world. And if you go to the next slide, this is the exhibition contains paintings and quilts. A lot of the paintings from the show are from children, and they were photographed. Some of them came from Bruce's images of children at Paradise Park. And I just wanted to sort of, with that in mind, like think about these children and Jim Crow having to escape sort of racial violence and to find joy and fun by themselves. And so these images were about joy, and there were many joyful moments that you're going to share in these
Right.
next couple of slides.
Right. So one of the things when I was talking to people, they would tell me more than just about Paradise Park. Like one time I was talking to a woman here in Tallahassee, and she went to Paradise Park, and she told me how when a McDonald's opened in Ocala, boy, they wanted to go to that McDonald's. She begged her, they couldn't. They couldn't go because it was segregated. And her father said, "You don't want those old skinny hamburgers. I'm gonna cook you," and he cooked them big old hamburgers. He said, "Y'all don't want those old skinny hamburgers."
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So parents, I think, found a way to really protect their children. And this photograph was really striking to me. And I know when I was writing the book, I didn't know who these women were. And so what happened was the book was done and we were sending it out to get blurbs. And Marcia Phelps, who wrote a book on American Beach, I asked for her to I wanted her to be a blurber, so they sent the book to her and she emailed me and she goes, "Lou, I know those women." And,
Wow.
and so she told me their names. So the women on either end are the Gary sisters, and they had a family farm in Ocala. But anyway, they were both high school students at the time. Faye on the left was telling me how she wanted to go to the University of Florida, but was denied, because of segregation. It didn't, she ended up teaching there later. But both of those young girls ended up being PhDs and named professors in their university. So they didn't let it stop them from being successful, even though they had to deal with this tremendous, you know, wave of antagonism, I don't know how else to call it. So these are just photos of the kids at the park. And like I said, you have to understand swimming areas, those kind of things were few and far between. So these kids are having a good time. You can see the parents are kind of dressed up, they're out there on the
Yeah.
beach in their clothes. It was a cool place to go. So they had a lot of fun there. To me, this photo is like black joy, having barbecue at Paradise Park. And I love that the guy's wearing a Paradise Park hat.
Yes.
That is Eddie Vereen in the background holding up a piece of white bread,
Yeah.
So they were having a good time, and Eddie Vereen made that possible. Silver Springs did not have that. They did not have that stuff. You could set up picnics. So Eddie Vereen knew what people liked and did his best to make the place as homey as possible, you know?
And had lots of family members working there, so that
Yeah.
increased sort of the familial spirit that existed at the park.
His entire family worked there. In fact, I met his adopted niece of his. He kind of adopted her, but I went to his house in Ocala and she took me into the kitchen and she said, "This is where we boiled all the Easter eggs." You know, because they would have Easter egg hunts and,
Yeah.
you know, so the whole family was involved, you know. This is a kid behind behind the cash register here, right? You know?
Mhm.
And so they had a concession, and Eddie Vereen was able to make money on these concessions. And he had the jukebox, and Eddie Vereen was known to like pull the plug if anybody got too close or whatever, dancing. But it was a big draw, and everybody knew about it. Like I interviewed people like William, I can't think of his first name, but Mr. Maxwell. He was a journalist for the St. Pete Times down here.
Uh-huh.
And I called him out of the blue thinking maybe he went there. And he did, and he told me, the jukebox, it was the pretty girls, it was the cold water, it was all the beautiful amenities, that people came there for. And they also had the snake thing, because Silver Springs had a famous snake guy called Ross Allen, and he hired African American men to work with him, and they put on the show down at Paradise Park. So these are some of the beauties who were at Paradise Park. These were the postcards that he made. And these are the beautiful models here.
Wow.
Yeah, and these are all photos that Bruce made to try to capture all the excitement, of Paradise Park.
And it was like one of the most well-traveled to parks for African Americans at that time period.
Right. Well, it was like I said, in Florida, there were only a couple of places you could go. Like I said, Butler Beach, and then you could go to American Beach. And there were some like impromptu places that people would just sort of figure out, okay, we can go here, that kind of thing. But it was hard to find places. And a lot of times when like a city like Sarasota finally caved in and decided to open a beach, they would give African Americans the absolute worst part of the beach.
Yeah, yeah, yes.
Rocky, hard to get to, muddy. So that was the thing. Now this was funny because I was talking to Reginald, who was Eddie Vereen's grandson, and they had an alligator called Old Coochie at Paradise Park. And the story is Old Coochie was bigger than the gator at Silver Springs, And so everybody was real proud of that, I
Wow.
want to say something else too about the snake handler guys, because one of the people I interviewed, his uncle was a snake handler there. And this guy, when I talked to him, his name's Samuel Crosby. He got interested in science because of him, and actually became like a working for Center for Disease Control and stuff. But he choked up when he was talking to me about his uncle, how much his uncle taught him about nature, science, and everything. So things on the surface, you're like, okay, that's a picture of an alligator, but then you find out the story about the people that were working there and the impact they had on
Yeah.
the community. So it's really powerful. So one of the big things at Paradise Park was the Labor Day the beauty contest. Okay,
Yes,
so
yes.
all the American legions, which were segregated too, all the Black African American legions would have a beauty contest locally and then send the beauties to Paradise Park. And these are some of the beauties with the American Legion getting their presents. Looks like a Lazy Susan or something there.
Yeah.
And this is a photo of the crowd because this was a major day to go to Paradise Park. You did not want to miss if you were in that area. And you can see how beautiful all the women are.
The
Looking
kids
together.
having fun.
Oh yeah, the kids are having a blast. The kids all wanted to either grow up to date the girls or to be the girls,
Yes, yes.
And Lottie Donaldson, the woman that was underwater, would help all the girls get their hair done and get their suits ready and all that good stuff. So they even had the Santa Claus, weird Santa came down the river,
Yes.
to visit. And one of the gentlemen in the picture is a civil rights activist, Frank Pinkston. but the kids were out there to see Santa. This was actually a greeting card that I think the Vereen family had. They made a greeting card out of one of the photos because they took this is a Silver Springs boat called the Walter Ray. It's named after one of the owner's sons at Paradise Park with Santa giving out presents.
And
And
this is the same guy that plays Santa each year, right?
oh my God, yeah, I think he was like a sheriff or something
Yeah.
at some point, but he played he had that weird mask on.
Yeah.
I don't know, it scared the hell out of me, but they liked it.
Yes.
And so again, the book was written and this woman, Alice Rose, her mother died. And when they went into the house, they found these beautiful photographs of the mother with the children. And Alice was the little kid in the background wandering around.
Mhm.
She became a teacher, educator, but her mother took them all out to Paradise Park. Her husband, that's not her husband, her husband at the time was in the Air Force. And so he was away in the Air Force, which I found, if you think about it, it's Jim Crow. Her husband is serving the country in the Air Force, right? And they're having to deal with segregation. That's always very troubling to me to remember. This is more photos from her family album that she had of them at Paradise Park. You can see how dressed up everybody got because it was an outing. It was an outing, and that's Alice on the little thing there. She was a baby at the time. And she told me that her mother always made sure that they got to go to every natural place they could go, so she made
Wow.
a big deal out of doing that. And so that's the images. And Stephen, did you have anything else you wanted to say?
I love that dress.
Don't you love the dresses and the
I
shoes and
love
all of
that
it?
dress. Yeah.
The hat, the outfit.
Yeah, I just love the images. I love that Bruce was able to take these images. I feel sad, as you mentioned, the other black photographer that his
Right.
house burned down and those works weren't able to be
Yeah, those were lost.
but that these were preserved. And so I think this is a very important lesson that if you have old family photos, to sort of do your best to digitize them because
Right.
there are many generations later on that will need them for historical purposes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I want to say one more thing because when, I've done a lot, I teach African American lit. One thing I always notice, the photographs you generally see from that period are people getting blown down by fire hoses or attacked
Mhm.
by dogs. And people do forget that people had lives.
They
They
did.
had birthdays, they had celebrations and that kind of thing. And that's what I think the photos capture is that joy and in spite of all the terrible things, that were happening.
Definitely, definitely, definitely. Well, thank you all. I think we are at the question portion. So if there are any questions.
Yes, and I will be facilitating that. Firstly, I just wanted to say to Lou and Stephen, thank you so much. And also just hearing these stories and how the time at the park really, you talked about the young man who decided, he wanted to be a doctor and all of these positive experiences
Mhm.
and the memories that these people had. And I think it just ties in so beautifully, Stephen, to your quilts about aspirations and hopes and dreams. So I think it's a really wonderful story, and the connections that you both have made are just spectacular. So I have a few questions. So let me start. This first one is for Stephen. So when selecting the materials for your quilt, um, this person has noticed that you really capture various times of day and night just beautifully and dramatically. So how does the material selection and interpretation lend itself to deciding what periods of day to illustrate? So does the fabric sort of happen, or do you have a time period and you go looking for the fabric, I think is the
I
question.
so a lot of it has to do with sort of the image and the time period and the mood that is happening in the drawing or in the photograph that I'm looking at. So I can see like a day scene in one of these paintings, but if something feels very moody about it and there's like a night spirit to it, then I will add that to it. And a lot of it is me finding fabrics from sourcing from different quilt shops. One thing that I do mention, and goes back to memory, is that because people know that I'm a quilter, sometimes when a relative passes, they'll often give me those fabrics. And so I often sort of say a prayer because that person didn't know when they were buying that fabric 40 years ago that they were
Right.
buying it from me. And so it's sort of
Oh,
memories that I include in the quilt.
That's wonderful. And I think, you know, being a part of this legacy, even if they didn't intend that, I can't think of a better way to express that. Lou, what about your background really drew you to focusing on the Black experience in America, particularly around Ocala and these parts? You said a lot of it was hidden.
yeah.
So the questioner is thinking, obviously, there's a lot of dedication and deep diving and poring over microfiche, which has absolutely ruined my vision as well. So,
Right.
how did you discover this amazing story?
Okay, like I said, I started out as a fiction writer, and so Wiki Watchy was a theme, okay? Because my parents, I live in North Florida, and we never went to Wiki Watchy, but I saw those billboards, you know, I'm like, damn,
Mhm.
you know, it just kind of sunk in my head, breathing underwater, you know? And so I ended up using those images in my writing for a long time. And then, so I went to Wiki Watchy to do research, and well, the day that I went, there were older mermaids performing. And I met them, and I ended up interviewing them, and then that snowballed into a book. And at the time, what I did, there were no Black mermaids, but I tracked down the African American women who worked at the hotel associated with Wiki Watchy. I
Oh,
tracked them down because I wanted the Black voice in there. So that was as close as I could get to the Black voice. Because I've noticed a lot of Florida histories will talk about Florida, but they won't mention African Americans who are always part of Florida history. And then I did a book on Cypress Gardens, and again, take me to the people who built the place. They're African Americans. So I interviewed the family of a man who helped build it. And they were the first African Americans to go there on Easter Sunday. And they still had their little Easter Sunday outfits, you know, preserved. And that was a place too that only hired like Black waiters and stuff. So
Mhm.
I interviewed a Black waiter. He was very elderly, but I found him, you know, I tried my best to include those stories because they do get left out of general histories. I don't know why. So then, like I said, I had met Bruce, and Bruce was a character. You know, he was still working until he was in his 90s. You know, and he was on his deathbed when I went in to tell him about. We did an exhibit of his photographs at Appleton Museum. And he saw the book and he was thrilled and all that. But I saw the photos there, and I was interested in doing another book, but I didn't want to do a book on Silver Springs, and so I decided to focus on Paradise Park because it was more manageable, it was smaller. So what I did is talk to as many people as I could and include as lengthy as, I mean, my interview sometimes would be 13 pages long, but of course I can't include all that, but I would select as much as I could and keep the voices in the book. Let them tell the story. So that's what I tried to do. And Marcia Phelps, who wrote the book on American Beach, her book was like a touchstone to me because she grew up there and went there. So that book was like a touchstone for me and how she wrote it. You know, of course, I included histories of other things because, you know, it was on Paradise Park was open for 20 years, so it wasn't a huge long thing, you know.
Right.
and
So
another
that's
sort
what
of
I've done.
another interesting thing you told me, I think sometimes people don't realize, is that as a historian and a person trying to write it down in book form, things don't always happen the way you want them or
No,
when you want them. So this project you could have had this 5 years ago, but it's going to take 10 years to sort of write and edit and get this book to how you want it. And as
yeah,
you
it
said,
takes,
somebody may tell you information after you have already written things, and so it modifies things over again.
yeah, and that's the thing with books, especially with people that live through segregation. They're getting older, you know. I mean, I still
Mhm.
remember the signs. I'm 66, so I remember seeing signs. So you have a generation of people that are going to go away. They're going to
Mhm.
disappear, and I think those stories are real important. So several of the people I interviewed have already passed away. you know, but I was able to capture that story before they did. And so I think that's real important. Like what Stephen's saying is the book was sent out to reviews for blurbs. Okay. So once I found out more information, there were 2 inserts in the book that were added after the book was already been laid out. The designer he's like, okay, let's include these. We included 2 separate stories in the book that came after the book had been completely designed, right before it went to press. And I was grateful they were willing to do that, you know. And then of course, once you write a book, then 10 other people come out of the book, you know. You know what I mean? You find more
Yeah.
stories. That's the thing.
Sounds like you're working on a sequel.
Well, so I think there should be a sequel, honestly. But
I think we have just time for 2 more questions. So Stephen, I'll throw this one back to you. Are there particular images or inspirations that you find lend itself more to quilt work versus painting?
With the medium, it's sort of like what the person in the work tells me that it needs to be. It sounds weird, but they'll either tell me if they need to be a painting or they need to be a quilt or whatever that I'm trying to communicate. And as an artist that works in multiple mediums, like I don't make quilts when I'm painting often. I have to separate the two because I don't want paint to get on the fabric that I'm using. So it can be pretty confusing to do both. And each time I go back to the other, it's like I'm learning how to paint again or I'm learning how to sew again. So I'm always feeling like I'm learning each time I go to create another work.
That's fantastic. And I think you know, after seeing them together, they do feel like they each have their own sort of vibe. They each have their own sort of story and way they're telling a story. So that makes a lot of sense to me. So the last question of the evening is for Lou. And the person wants to know, how long did this project take you? When did you start your research on this project and how long did the process last?
well, it took a long time. Well, I don't know exactly because I go into a zone or something, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But I had been thinking about it for a while. I knew that Cynthia, you know, the person that ended up working with me on it, was trying to do something, but it never quite happened. It turns out she just didn't, you know, it just wasn't going to happen because I wasn't going to touch it. You know, if she was going to do it, I was going to leave it because I already had seen the photos. I wanted to do it, but I was like, no. And so then I decided, okay, it's been a few years, nothing happened. Let me call and see. So we connected, and then I started in earnest, you know, really doing interviews. And, you know, the thing about interviews is you interview one person, then you find out 5 more people you have to talk to. I was driving all over Ocala. I was sitting in parking lots. I interviewed a preacher in a parking lot in his van, Mr. Clarence Cotton, you know, but he was amazing. And so, you know, it takes a long time because what I'll do is the way I interview people is I sit down with them. I might be at their house for 5 hours. We're sitting at a table, and I sent Stephen a clip. I don't know if you ever listened to it, but I interviewed this woman named Arizona Vereen. Her and Henry together, they were both there at the same time. The TV's blaring, the mailman's knocking on the door. It was crazy, you know. And so I had that interview, but I had to sort through it and all that. So those things take time, and I'm willing to sit down, and that's a lot of reason why I think people are willing to open up, you know, because you got to let people feel comfortable. So I heard a lot of stories. And then you have the writing process of, first of all, transcribing interviews. You got to transcribe them. Then you got to start thinking, you know, I had to have some kind of outline. Before I even got started, I had to pitch it to the press, University Press of Florida. And to do that, you have to pitch it. You have to have a plan. You can't just say, oh, I want to do this. You have to have an outline. So you spend a lot of time doing that, months, you know, just making an outline and then starting to piece together the pieces, you know, the stories that are being told. And it's like juggling balls or so. It's like juggling 12 balls at one time. Then once you do that, you know, you submit it and then they send it out to get reviews. The reviewers make suggestions. One of the reviewers pissed me off. He thought I had too much oral history. And I'm like, well, that's not changing,
Yeah.
you know? And so that happened, and then you go through all these stages, then the copy editor gets it, and she wants to change the vernacular speech. I'm like, no,
Keep it.
snakes in the South, people do say, call snakes him, he and him. Cause she's like, no, you can't call a snake he or him. I'm like, that's how they call them, and that's what they're named. That's how they're doing it. You know, so you have to fight people. And then it takes a while, and then the book comes out, and you're like, oh my God, when did I do that? You know?
Yes, yes.
So a long time. I don't know if that answers.
Yes.
I mean, that's how these projects go. All right. Well, I want to thank you both for your generous time tonight. Thank you for your thoughtful responses. This has been such a wonderful program. I also want to thank everyone that's in attendance this evening. We hope to see you again next month for another Zoom History Club event. It'll be a sneak peek of our spring exhibition from dusk till dawn. So we hope to see you all then. Thank you all again so much for your questions. And thank you, Lou and Stephen.